Welcome to Wicked Lies, a podcast of how truth was destroyed by lies. Caution: podcast contains real people who were destroyed by wicked lies. For mature audiences only.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining the Advocates for the Falsely Accused. We are here today, and we're going to be talking about the presumption of innocence. I'm sure everybody knows the presumption of innocence means you are presumed innocent when accused of some sort of allegation. Unfortunately, in today's world, we're finding that you are not presumed innocent. You are actually presumed guilty and need to be proved innocent. I'm Dawn Durrell. I am the Vice President of AFFA, and we also have our other board members. We have Dawn Wolfson, we have Julie, we have Matt, and then we have some other guests that have joined us. And Larry, we'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us today in our discussion. So as we get started, I will give a little brief intro into my husband's case. Some of you are familiar with it, some haven't heard it yet, but Ronis was convicted of a sex assault back in 2003. The prosecutor in the case was fully aware of other perpetrators prior to, or I should say the actual true perpetrators prior to his indictment and before his trial started. However, portrayed the story out to the grand jury as it being Ronis. Everything that he did was done in a fashion, he meaning the prosecutor, was done in a fashion to where it basically was saying that Ronis was guilty before he could even have a chance at any trial and stating any of his evidence. When he went to trial, they made it basically a one-sided. They denied him his witnesses. They denied him his constitutional rights. I personally was one of his witnesses, only I did not testify before a jury. I only testified, before the judge and the prosecution. Very long story short, Ronis was convicted in 2003 and sentenced to 20 years in prison for a crime that he did not commit while the two actual known perpetrators walked free. And then as we moved forward, we had evidence that showed that they were the actual perpetrators via their personal confessions, as well as other evidence, meaning the accuser had also come forward unintentionally stating who it was that actually did it. The sad thing is even though they knew he was innocent, even after we came forward with the evidence, they still did everything that they could to try to stop this from him being exonerated and still tried to maintain that he was guilty. So much so that towards the end, when he was finally exonerated 16 years later, they were chasing basically after the accuser, trying to get her to still come forward and say that he did it, only she wouldn't cooperate with them. This is something that is happening more and more in our legal system. And of course, with social media and everything that we have at our hands and at our disclosure today, we see that it's happening even more. We find out about stories through these stories of exoneration. There's so many that are out there that are falsely accused. And because of social media, people are assuming them to be guilty before they even have a chance to even state anything that could possibly show their innocence. And then unfortunately, in cases like Ronis's, where there was no DNA, but yet he was adamant that it was not him, there was proof that it was somebody else, there was still nothing done to help show that he was innocent. In fact, he was denied in every way, fashion that they possibly could to stop him from being able to show his innocence. And so just seeing how these kind of things happen today, it just shows, we talk about corruption in the system is beyond corrupt, and there's such a need for reform. And I think one of the things that really needs to change is this fact that we need to go back to where people are presumed innocent before they're proven guilty versus it being the other way around. So I'm going to go ahead and we're trying to keep the timing a little bit to about 5 minutes per person so we can open it up for discussion. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Dawn and she can share her portion. And then as we get a little bit through everybody, then we can go back and we can ask questions and go from there.
Okay, well, actually, why don't we let Larry go first? He was going to talk about the lack of presumption of innocence in the family court system, and then I'll go after that.
Most definitely. Go ahead, Larry.
Thank you, Dawn. Just to introduce myself, I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or that's where my law practice has been since 1993 when I joined my late father, who passed away in 2000. But then I continued it 7 years with my brother and then the rest alone. I never really had an active family law practice because I think the family law system is broken. The idea of one lawyer and one client, and the lawyer builds his business model around uh building that one individual, to me, cannot be efficient. I have a solution which is called limited scope representation, where I believe in training people to do 80% of their own case themselves. But so I made an online program, and I think that that's a solution in family court. The lack of the presumption of innocence in family court comes from, in high conflict situations, I don't know how many of you had lost that presumption of innocence because of family court, but there's guilt by suspicion because judges don't have the time to have the whole deep, lengthy trial. So once someone's accused, you say, we'll deal with this in 3 years. But in the meanwhile, supervised custody, if you're unfortunate enough to plead to a PFA, like a mutual or something, a parent loses all their rights during a very lengthy, expensive litigation that bankrupts really both parties. And then by the time that a hearing comes up, there's no more money to defend yourself, is what I see on social media. I just heard Dawn's story, which I wasn't aware of, and I'm certainly interested in hearing more. But so that's where I'm aware of a lack of presumption of innocence. To me, I hear a lot of complaints about issues of law that I think are because of corruption, as I heard two people point out. I'll try and get names as fast as I can. But a system can be good, but if good laws aren't applied and there's not the right people enforcing laws, then it seems like it's a system that's not working, or that the system is broken. But I think that it's individuals that can really strain or neutralize a good system, because I think we have a better system here. Are we all the United States? I'm going to assume for the rest of my discussion that we are, unless someone cuts me off, feel free to interrupt. But
I think we have one person who isn't, who's from Ireland, but most of us are.
sure, the system here is the best on the globe, but the problem is enforcement. You guys all noticed, hey, I have a corrupt jurisdiction here, a corrupt jurisdiction. So, like, to me, so how do we fight corruption is what I see the issue being. And again, I'm a representative of Davia. I am the executive manager. I was really hired recently, but I've gotten to know Ed, the president, and he invited me to join them because of my YouTube channel, The Law Center, and my activism. That I have about 300 videos that I put about anti-corruption. So I'm really on top of this issue, how to, divorce court, and anti, reform and things like that. So this is all right in my wheelhouse. I didn't do criminal law. Actually, I'm a personal injury lawyer, or a recovering personal injury lawyer, because it was kind of soul sucking. I actually did enjoy it. And this is really what I love making videos, and I love being an advocate. So I hope that wasn't too long. I look forward to meeting the rest of you and learning how I can support you moving forward with what you're trying to do here. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Larry.
you. Okay, so as my cat decides to join the party, here he is again. So I put a link into the chat if you all want to copy it off. It's our last session, and pretty much all of us told our stories last time. Mine was actually a false rape accusation against my son, and I'm not going to talk about it today. But one of our members who isn't here, she's actually going back to court tomorrow, had recommended this book, which hopefully you can all see it. It's called Punishment Without Trial: Why Plea Bargaining is a Bad Idea by Carissa Byrne-Hessock. So I thought I would talk about that a little bit today. Historically, plea bargains were actually frowned upon in the United States. Our founders did create a system with a presumption of innocence, possibly because there wasn't any such thing in the English legal system that they were dealing with at the time. But they wrote the right to a jury trial into the Constitution. So how is it that plea bargains have become so common in the US, and why are they a bad idea? Judges were actually reluctant to accept guilty pleas through most of US history. They wanted to give defendants time to at least think about what they were doing before allowing a guilty plea. But things have completely turned upside down. It may possibly be that there is a belief in this country that people have to be responsible for their actions. It could be just that people believe, if you've done something bad, you should be punished. But literally, prosecutors started incentivizing guilty pleas by awarding lighter sentences, and judges started penalizing people who pled innocent but were found guilty. And plea bargaining did go from being the exception to being the rule. They're not all bad. I mean, if a person actually is guilty, they're efficient. They save time, they save money, they save resources. The Supreme Court even approved the concept back in the 1970s when a prosecutor tried to go back on a deal that his predecessor had made. And the court said, no, a deal is a deal. You have to abide by it, even if you don't agree with it. At the time, the Chief Justice actually stated that if less than 90% of defendants plead guilty, the system won't be able to handle it. And that's because the system had started prioritizing sending more money to law enforcement and less to courts. So it's become the dominant culture in our court system, although people who watch Law and Order probably aren't even aware of that. So, why do innocent people take plea deals? Sometimes they just weigh everything and they decide that it's better than the risk of going up against a jury. Even if you're innocent, you don't know what the jury's going to do. And then the prosecutor's coming at you with, if you get convicted, I'm giving you 20 years. But hey, if you take the deal now, I'll only give you 5 or 2 or whatever. And suddenly your attorney is pushing you to take the deal because your attorney's not certain you can win either. So sometimes people just decide that they're better off. Or, for example, someone who's really poor and they get thrown in on a bogus drug thing. It wasn't their drugs, but they want to get out of there, get back to their job. They don't want to lose their apartment. They don't want to lose their life. They take the deal. So much for there being a presumption of innocence in our system. And the biggest reason they are a bad idea is that sometimes innocent people plead guilty and suddenly you have somebody who's branded as being a criminal who really isn't one, with everything that comes with that. So other reasons that they're a bad deal, sometimes they're imposed with time limits. For example, a man who had committed a burglary all of a sudden got charged out of the clear blue sky with a rape. Well, he was waiting for the DNA to come back. And the prosecutor comes at him with this great deal where he doesn't have to go on the sex offender registry, and he'll get a better deal than if he's convicted on the burglary charge. The guy almost took it, and then he decided no. Well, what he found out was that the prosecutor already had the DNA back and it showed he wasn't the rapist. And he never would have known that if he had taken the deal. Sometimes you are literally giving up your constitutional rights if you take a plea deal. Phoenix, Arizona actually has a system set up around plea deals where they offer the deal before the defendant has had a chance to see the discovery. So they don't even know what the prosecutor has on them, if they have a strong case, a weak case, or what. And then there is another county, Franklin County in Pennsylvania. The prosecutors have been known to approach defendants at one of their initial hearings. They don't have an attorney yet. And if the defendant says, well, I really need to talk to a lawyer first, the prosecutor says, if you get an attorney, the deal is off. So we've got situations in this country where prosecutors are literally asking people to waive their constitutional rights, or they have the threat of being dealt with much more harshly. So those are some of the reasons plea bargains are bad. We also have things in our system where they get around the presumption of innocence with, for example, pretrial detention. You're in jail, you can't afford bail, but you're innocent. Civil asset forfeiture, they take property away from people who aren't convicted of a crime, or they charge you with fees. You get hit with fees with, telephone and canteen and I don't know what the heck all, and whether you're innocent or you're guilty. So anyway, the point of the book is basically the process is the punishment, and between being arrested and dealing with police and jail staff and having to sit in a courtroom, paying bail fees and fines, you're being punished just being there by having lost your freedom to live your life the way you want to live your life. So anyway, that's kind of the first half of the book. The later chapters talk about ways to reform the system and suggestions and so on. And if you don't want to buy a copy, go down to your local library and pick one up, but it's definitely worth the read. Thanks.
Could you type it into the chat? Because when you showed it up,
Absolutely, I will do
blurred,
that.
so we
Yep.
couldn't read it.
If anyone
Okay.
saw the movie 13th, that's focused on the African American community, but it still applies to all ethnicities. It's how the criminal justice system infringes upon people's rights. Sorry, just want to throw that in.
It's called the 13th.
13th is in the 13th Amendment. Yeah, it's
Okay.
a Netflix Netflix
Yeah.
special, but actually I think it's on YouTube for free. You don't need to be a Netflix subscriber. It'll come right up. It's really focused, like I said, on African Americans, but it's really the issue that the book seems to be covering the same topics, just from
Yeah.
all race, all ethnicities.
Well, the 13th Amendment didn't really abolish slavery. It just abolished slavery unless you're convicted of a crime.
That's the movie. Yeah, that's exactly what it discusses. And yeah.
Thank you, Don, for that. Okay, next we'd like to have Julie. You want to share your story?
Well, just really quickly, I was accused of abusing my youngest daughter, who's autistic. I have 5 kids, and I went through a really bad divorce, high conflict, and my 4 oldest kids had been alienated from me after my husband up and left and went 3,000 miles away from us. And I raised my 2 youngest alone here after he just up and left us. And then he tried to kidnap my youngest out of the graduation parking lot and everything. And then when that didn't work, then I was accused of sexual and emotional abuse of her, and right away you're guilty. And she was in somebody else's house, and Adult Protective Services did a full investigation, and even though they testified that they did not find any evidence I was ever abusive, that I ever did anything to her, the judge still, nothing was resolved. And then within a month after the hearing, my daughter was gone out of the state of Maine, and to this day I don't know where she is. And you lose everything because your reputation is now destroyed. You know, like, I work with older people, and I do in-home care, and it was really hard. You know, I was very fortunate that my bosses all supported me, and they still do. But if I had been convicted, I would have lost my job. I would have lost everything, you know. So it's very difficult. But, you know, like, it doesn't matter. Once it's in the papers and everybody talks about you, nobody looks at you at the grocery store anymore, because in their mind, it must be true. If the papers printed it, it's true. And so here I am. I'm trying to sell my house and move and start over again. But yeah, you're guilty regardless. So
How long ago was this, Julie?
the trial was over a year ago. And but it all started 2.5 years ago. It took 2 years to even, over 2 years to go to trial. They put a PFA on me. I wasn't allowed to see my daughter or communicate with her. She didn't even understand why I didn't send her Christmas gifts or birthday gifts. Like, she didn't understand that I couldn't even communicate with her. I wasn't allowed to, you know, by law, or I would have been arrested, because they had a PFA on me.
And you
Yeah.
don't know where she is right now? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Wow.
All I know is she's not in the state of Maine anymore.
But you have a family court case open?
No, it's closed now. The judge, you know, I wasn't found guilty of abusing my daughter or any of my kids. And
You were exonerated then. You won your case, but he fled with the kids and they're alienated.
well, he had already fled with my 3 oldest ones during our divorce, and he was found guilty of doing that. But of course, the judge doesn't make a move back, and so here I was with my 2 youngest, who were very young at the time, and I ended up having to raise them here alone because I couldn't afford to move 3,000 miles away. And he would see them every summer with them. And their doctor and their counselor would always say that he is emotionally abusing them, because they would come back and say that their dad would tell them to say that I was abusing them and everything. Well, then when my next to youngest daughter graduated high school, he gave her a one-way ticket back to California, and she moved there. But then when my youngest daughter graduated, she did not want to go there. She was afraid of her dad. She's autistic. So instead, my older siblings and him said that I was abusing her, and she was they had her go to a home that I thought was friends of mine, but it wasn't. Told them to get guardianship of her, and they put a PFA on me and everything, and Adult Protective Services did a whole investigation. I was found innocent. They even tried to have me plea bargain, and they would drop the PFA against me if I plea bargained with them and allowed them to have full guardianship of my daughter fortunately, I didn't do the plea bargain, even though I was scared to death because they kept saying that if I was found guilty of the PFA of abusing my daughter, that they would have a PFA on me and I would lose my job. And I was scared to death, but I didn't do it. And I'm glad because the judge found me innocent, but they scared me to death with that bargain. I'll tell you that.
Do you know how to use the chat feature?
No.
Okay. Well, I was my email is glawrence.demarco@gmail.com. Do you email?
Yes.
All right. I'll send it to I'll send you I'll get an email to you, and okay. We'll talk later. I don't want to interrupt the chat the meeting.
No, it's okay. Thank you, Julie. It just shows, we talk about the presumption of innocence and how, unfortunately, it's dismissed in so many cases now because it's like you're just presumed you're guilty and you got to prove your innocence. And in cases like that, to have to
And the plea deal.
Oh, most definitely. And to have to fight, one, to prove that you're innocent, that you didn't do what you were accused of. But then when you are found guilty, like in Ronis's case, it was a sex assault. He was registered as a sex offender for 16 years. So that means his face was full blown on all kinds of different places until he was exonerated and then they had to remove it. But how do you come back from that? And that's one of the other challenges that is in place for anyone who was falsely accused or convicted of something, because like you said, it's in social media, it's out there, and people assume that what is said in the papers and on social media is golden and everybody should go by what was said there versus what the facts really are. Thank you for sharing, Julie.
I'll never forget in my son's case, my ex-husband, his father basically said, that the girl who accused him, her word has more rights than his does.
Crazy. It's such a disheartening when you think about it, because we know how many are out there. I mean, we have a small group with us here today, and this is such a tiny, tiny piece of those who have had to endure these type of trials and tribulations. And there's so many out there that don't even know of groups like ours who are there to provide some sort of support that is so necessary. But this is why we need to get loud and make noise and it be known. And that's why AFFA is here, with hopes of helping make these changes, because there's such a dire need for reform in the system. Let's go ahead and move on to Matt. Would you like to go ahead and share your story?
Yeah, I did share my story last time. So my name is no longer Matt DiMuccio. I did legally change it. I am completely one of the lucky ones. Keep it as brief as possible. It's just I was a music teacher in a public school. I was falsely accused of sexually assaulting one of my students in front of the entire class. Did not happen. Case was dismissed by prosecutors after 2.5 years. Later sealed. The school district offered for me, after 4 years of administrative leave, to come back and work as a high school music teacher. I declined. I went to media and put out press release. They didn't pick up any of it. They all ignored me. And as a result, all that is just up there forever. So I did go to the courts and certify legal name change. So I am absolutely one of the lucky ones, although it did take a toll. It was 5 years to resolve it from beginning to end. And I did have recantations, and also just the whole notion that somebody, and what happened in my case, they're claiming that I invented an activity to touch kids, when in fact, the activity is part of major curriculum that I was trained in, the school paid for. That I would be doing that in front of an entire class is just ridiculous. Anyways, I'm lucky it's behind me. But one of the things that I'd like to focus on as far as presumption of innocence, which is an idea that dates back to the Roman Empire and was more so codified during the Enlightenment period. And that's after centuries of what they call trial by ordeal, which is like tortures and things like the whole witch hunts, witch crusades, right? It's led us to a point where, yeah, we do have this country where we have presumption of innocence as a part of due process enshrined in the U.S. Constitution under the Fifth Amendment. Yes, but there have been all sorts of weaknesses that have cropped up, especially recently, in relation to specifically advancements in technology and communications and electronic networks. And the thing to keep in mind, due process, and which I've just said is part of enlightenment, shows up, I think, as a phrase twice in the Constitution, is supposed to ensure that people with power don't abuse their power by alleging or supporting false allegations for political reasons. And it's supposed to protect everyone from improperly losing life, liberty, or property. So, all right. We have that, but okay, also have these technological advances, and we do have a process within the courts that is completely imperfect for all sorts of reasons that people have elucidated so far, where in some estimates you have false convictions of up to 10 to 15%, depending on who's looking at all the data. But effectively, we don't really have much of due process of anything within civil society. And some of the reason behind that is just the way that prosecutors, police, and media all work together, right? And how they all influence each other, where you can just put out somebody immediately, essentially rendering them radioactive. And what happens if the case is dismissed? They've already been put out. There's already been a suspicion. There's an allegation. And that really feeds into how human brains are wired. We all have implicit bias. We have unconscious bias, subconscious feelings that are imprinted on us by prior influences, by all sorts of environmental things, and we're unaware of it. And it's very well known within the psychological research. They have names for all these different things, such as, okay, people have gender biases, yeah. There can be ethnicity ones. There can be an ability bias where you might connect more or be more likely to believe somebody who has talents that are more similar to you. An affinity bias, a like me bias. Um, there's a bias with beauty. People who appear more physically attractive in the justice system tend to fare better. And it's not just there, you can have a halo effect and all sorts of things. There's authority bias. There's when it comes to false allegations and presumption of innocence, the one that crops up is confirmation bias. If somebody has a preconceived notion, preconceived opinions, and they see somebody accused of this and they fall within whatever uh, whatever group, right? They're seen as conforming to a certain bias that a person might have beforehand to think that they're guilty or not or whatever. And then I think the one that really comes up is anchoring bias, which means that people tend to be most influenced by the thing they hear first. And who puts out the first narrative? It's the police, it's the prosecutors, and it's the media. They put out the first narrative, and it's a lot more challenging for people to take in new information and change their first gut opinion or their first opinion. And that comes to the framing as well. Like, what is the framing by law enforcement? What is the framing by media? So it puts us in this situation where the media can put out images, as was in my case of mugshots of somebody in handcuffs and ankle restraints, and that influences people's opinions forever. You can't unring the bell, um, and it really undermines due process and presumption of innocence as a value. And why is that? Well, it kind of is a business. Why am I saying kind of? It is a business.
It
It's
is
a
the
big
business,
business
yes.
for the police, for prosecutors. It's a PR thing. The whole thing of a perp walk, like that is completely at odds with the whole notion of presumption of innocence. It's in the word. You're not a perpetrator. You haven't proven that, although you're parading them around. There's a spectacle. Um, and that's a PR thing. And then for media, it's very lucrative and it feeds into a real weakness in humans for moral panics where, all right, there might be a boogeyman. Is somebody going to create their career out of that? People are afraid of a certain thing at a certain point. Media can make a lot of money off of it and so on. So I think these are real weaknesses and a real threat to all, given just the fact that the technology, the law has not really caught up to the technology yet and hasn't grappled with these different things. And there should be changes, right? Like maybe it should go to a judge and be at the judge's discretion before you telecast somebody out. If it's hinging completely on testimony alone. Um, there are all sorts of things that they can look at, but to me, it just seems very naive to think that, all right, you have the structure of the criminal justice system, then you have civil society, and in civil society, you can have people leaping to whatever judgment, and that doesn't some way influence the people, the human beings in the justice system. It's just those things can't be completely siloed, and I think there just needs to be a reevaluation of how this all works in light specifically with the technology we have now. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I agree. Unfortunately, as much as we know how much change needs to be done, it's the people that are in the authoritative places that need to be helping make that. And I think that's where we have a lot of change that needs to happen too. We have people who have actually lost their integrity. And that just makes it that much harder for us to get the justice that's necessary when you got crooked prosecutors, you got unfortunately biased judges. It makes it really difficult for the change to happen in the criminal justice system that we actually need, that would help prevent these type of things from happening, or even allow the changes that need to come that could be put in place. Like you said, with technology we have today, there's things that could be implemented that would help prevent these wrongful convictions that stem from false accusations, but it also helps stop those false accusations from going any further than the initial allegation that was made. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your stories. We would like to open it up now to anybody who is visiting with us today who would like to share their story.
Thank you for listening to Wicked Lies. If you would like to learn more about advocates for the falsely accused, join us at www.theaffa.org. That's www.theaffa.org.